It was just another day in Washington, D.C., where the air always seemed thick with tension and ambition. J.D. Vance, best-selling author of Hillbilly Elegy and a rising star in conservative politics, had been invited to appear on a popular liberal talk show hosted by none other than Eleanor Hayes, known for her razor-sharp wit and no-holds-barred interviews. The moment J.D. walked onto the set, you could feel the energy shift. The audience buzzed with anticipation, sensing that this wasn't going to be an ordinary interview. Eleanor greeted him with a polite smile, but there was something cold behind her eyes, a hint of what was coming next. J.D. Vance, she began, leaning forward slightly as if sizing him up. You've become quite the darling of the Republican Party lately. Tell me, do you think your book gives people permission to blame their struggles on culture instead of addressing systemic issues? J.D. sat calmly, his expression unreadable. He knew he was walking into a storm, but he also knew one thing: Eleanor Hayes wasn't about to intimidate him. Well, Eleanor, he replied smoothly, I don't think my book is about blaming anyone or anything. It's more about understanding how our experiences shape us, and yes, sometimes those experiences are tied to culture. But let's not forget, many of the policies you advocate for often ignore these very same cultural factors. Eleanor raised an eyebrow, clearly unfazed. Interesting. So tell me, J.D., why should working-class Americans trust someone who left his roots behind to attend Yale Law School? Isn't that the epitome of elitism? The room fell silent. You could hear a pin drop. J.D. leaned back in his chair, letting out a small laugh before responding. My journey from Middletown, Ohio to Yale isn't about leaving my roots behind. It's about proving that anyone can rise above circumstances if given the right opportunities. And frankly, Eleanor, I find it ironic that someone like you, who probably never stepped foot in a place like Middletown, feels entitled to lecture me about where I come from. That comment hit hard. A murmur rippled through the audience, some clapping softly while others exchanged glances. Eleanor's face tightened, her composure beginning to crack. You're deflecting, J.D., she shot back quickly. Let's talk about your stance on healthcare. How can you justify supporting policies that leave millions without access to affordable medical care? J.D. nodded slowly, as though expecting this line of attack. Eleanor, the issue isn't whether we care about healthcare. It's about finding solutions that actually work. Expanding government programs hasn't solved the problem. It's only made things worse. Real reform means empowering individuals and communities, not relying solely on bureaucrats in Washington. Her lips curled into a smirk. Empowering individuals. That sounds nice, J.D., but it rings hollow when paired with tax cuts for the wealthy. Don't you think priorities matter? He didn't flinch. Instead, he delivered a response so powerful it would soon go viral across social media. Priorities absolutely matter, Eleanor. And mine lie with creating jobs, strengthening families, and giving people hope. If your idea of progress involves taxing the rich until they leave the country, then maybe we're not speaking the same language after all. At that point, Eleanor tried to regain control of the conversation, but it was too late. J.D.'s words struck a chord with viewers at home, resonating deeply with millions who felt ignored by the political elite. By the time the interview ended, it was clear that J.D. Vance had turned what could have been a PR disaster into a triumph. But here's the twist. This wasn't just any ordinary clash of ideologies. There was much more beneath the surface. As the cameras stopped rolling, J.D. stepped off the stage to a mix of applause and murmurs. But behind the scenes, something unusual happened. Eleanor Hayes didn't storm away as expected. Instead, she lingered, her expression unreadable. Few people knew this, but Eleanor wasn't just any liberal talk show host. She came from a family deeply entrenched in politics, a dynasty that had shaped policies for decades. Her father, Senator Henry Hayes, was infamous for his role in crafting legislation that disproportionately affected working-class communities. And yet, Eleanor often presented herself as a champion of the underdog, a facade many found hard to believe. J.D. noticed her hesitation and decided to push further. Something on your mind, Eleanor? He asked casually, though his tone carried a hint of challenge. Eleanor hesitated, then spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. You're smarter than most give you credit for, JD. Smarter than Mimi, maybe. Her admission caught him off guard. For a moment neither of them said anything. The tension in the room felt palpable, like the calm before a storm. What are you getting at? JD finally asked, his curiosity piqued. I know things, she replied cryptically. Things about your past. About mine too. Things no one else knows. Now it was JD's turn to feel uneasy. He'd always been careful, meticulous even, about keeping certain parts of his life private. But Eleanor's words hinted at secrets far darker than anything he could have imagined. Care to elaborate? He pressed, trying to mask his growing concern. She shook her head, glancing around nervously. Not here. If I tell you, it changes everything, for both of us. The exchange ended abruptly when her producer called her back to the set for another segment. JD watched her go, his mind racing. What did she mean by things? Was she bluffing, or did she truly possess information capable of unraveling his carefully constructed image? Back home, JD couldn't shake the encounter. He spent hours poring over old files, digging through emails, and re-examining every decision he'd made since leaving Middletown. Nothing seemed out of place, yet the seed of doubt planted by Eleanor refused to fade. Meanwhile, Eleanor faced her own demons. Her family's political legacy wasn't built on transparency or honesty. There were skeletons in their closet, secrets so explosive they could destroy not just her career, but her entire family's reputation. And now, those secrets threatened to surface, thanks to JD's relentless pursuit of truth. But here's the kicker. Neither of them realized they weren't alone in this game. Someone, or perhaps multiple someones, was watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. This wasn't just a battle between two opposing ideologies. It was a web of lies, betrayals, and hidden agendas that stretched far beyond Washington, D.C. And as the days turned into weeks, the stakes grew higher. Every move JD made was scrutinized. Every word Eleanor uttered dissected. The line between personal vendettas and public battles blurred, leaving both of them questioning who they could trust, and whether either of them would survive unscathed. The following week, JD received an anonymous package at his office. Inside was a USB drive labeled simply, EH. He recognized the initials immediately. Eleanor Hayes. Curiosity got the better of him, and he plugged the drive into his computer. What he saw chilled him to the bone. It wasn't just random files or documents. The contents painted a picture far more sinister than anything JD had anticipated. There were emails exchanged between Eleanor and high-ranking officials in her father's administration, detailing plans to manipulate data in key legislative reports, contracts showing kickbacks from corporate lobbyists, photos of secret meetings held late at night in undisclosed locations. But the most shocking revelation came toward the end. A video recording of Eleanor herself, captured on camera during one of those clandestine gatherings. In it, she admitted to knowingly pushing policies that would harm working-class Americans, all while publicly claiming to fight for their rights. JD sat back, stunned. This wasn't just evidence of corruption, it was proof of betrayal on a massive scale. If this information ever saw the light of day, it wouldn't just ruin Eleanor's career, it could dismantle her family's entire political empire. Before he could process everything, his phone rang. It was Eleanor. I take it you've seen the files, she said, her voice tense but steady. How did you get these? JD asked, still reeling from the revelations. That's not important right now, she replied sharply. What matters is what you plan to do with them. JD hesitated. Part of him wanted to expose her immediately, to let the world see the truth. But another part knew this was bigger than just Eleanor. If he released the information without understanding its full implications, he risked becoming collateral damage himself. I need answers first, he told her firmly. Why are you showing me this? There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Eleanor finally spoke, her voice carried a weight that surprised him. Because I'm tired, JD. Tired of pretending. Tired of being part of a system that crushes people like us. People who actually care about making a difference. But if I try to leave, they'll destroy me. And maybe you too. Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Was she telling the truth? Or was this another elaborate scheme to manipulate him? As JD mulled over her statement, strange things started happening around him. His car was tampered with outside his house. A mysterious figure followed him during a jog in the park. Even his phone seemed to act up, cutting out calls randomly as though being monitored. It became clear that whoever was behind the corruption wouldn't hesitate to silence anyone threatening to expose them. And JD realized he wasn't just dealing with Eleanor anymore. This was a much larger conspiracy involving powerful figures who would stop at nothing to protect their interests. Meanwhile, Eleanor faced her own battles. Her producer grew suspicious of her erratic behavior, asking pointed questions about her recent interactions with JD. At home, old letters and photographs resurfaced, reminding her of the sacrifices her family made and the price they exacted from others to maintain their influence. One evening, while reviewing the files on the USB drive, JD discovered something even more alarming, a name buried deep within the documents, his own. It turned out he'd been under surveillance for months. Every move he made, every conversation he had likely been recorded and analyzed by someone watching closely. This revelation hit him hard. He thought he'd left his past behind, that he'd built a new life free from the struggles of Middletown, but now it seemed fate had other plans. The very same forces he sought to challenge were closing in, determined to keep him quiet. And then, just when JD thought things couldn't get worse, he received another call. This time, it wasn't Eleanor. It was a voice he didn't recognize, cold and calculating. "If you value your safety and hers, you'll stay out of this," the caller warned before hanging up. Now JD found himself caught in a deadly game of cat and mouse, forced to decide whether to expose the truth and risk everything, or play along and hope for a chance to strike back later. But here's the real question: can JD trust Eleanor, or is she merely using him as a pawn in her own desperate bid for redemption? JD knew he was running out of time. The pressure mounted with each passing hour, and the stakes grew higher. He couldn't shake the feeling that every step he took was being watched, every decision dissected by unseen eyes. Yet despite the danger, he refused to back down. That night, JD met Eleanor at an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, a neutral ground they both agreed upon. The air was cold, the silence broken only by the distant hum of traffic. They stood face to face, two people bound together by secrets neither fully understood. "I have proof," JD said, pulling out a flash drive identical to the one Eleanor had sent him. "Everything you gave me and more." I dug deeper, Eleanor. "Your family isn't the only one involved here. There are others. Names, faces, connections that stretch across industries and borders." Eleanor's expression hardened. "You don't understand what you're playing with, JD. This isn't just about politics. It's bigger than either of us." "Then explain it to me," he demanded. "Tell me why someone is willing to kill to keep this quiet." She hesitated, her resolve wavering for the first time. Finally she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's not just corruption, it's control. Control over resources, over information, over people's lives. My father built an empire based on influence, but somewhere along the way, it became something darker, and now it's too big to stop." JD listened intently, piecing together the puzzle. What started as a simple clash of ideologies had evolved into a battle against a shadowy network of power brokers who operated in the shadows, manipulating events from behind closed doors. "But if we expose them," Eleanor continued, "there will be consequences. Innocent people will suffer, entire communities could collapse. And if we don't," JD countered, "how many more lives will they destroy? How many more families will pay the price?" For a moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of their choices hung heavy between them. Then slowly, Eleanor nodded. "All right," she said finally. "We do this together, or not at all." With newfound determination, JD and Eleanor devised a plan. Using the evidence on the drives, they would leak the information piece by piece, targeting key players without revealing their sources. At the same time, they prepared contingency plans, ensuring they could disappear if necessary. The operation began quietly, with small leaks designed to test the waters. Anonymous tips were sent to investigative journalists, whistleblowers encouraged to come forward. Slowly but surely, cracks began to appear in the facade of invincibility surrounding the corrupt elite. But retaliation came swiftly. Threats escalated. Attempts were made to discredit them, and allies disappeared overnight. One evening, JD returned home to find his apartment ransacked, files missing, and a chilling message scrawled on the wall: "You can't hide forever." Fear gripped him, but fear also fueled his resolve. He reached out to Eleanor, proposing a final move, a public confrontation that would leave no room for doubt or denial. Together they orchestrated a press conference, inviting reporters, activists, and citizens alike to witness the unveiling of truths long buried. On the day of the event, tension crackled in the air, cameras flashed, questions flew, and whispers filled the room. When JD and Eleanor stepped onto the stage, the crowd fell silent, sensing the gravity of the moment. "We're here today because the truth demands to be heard," JD began, his voice steady, despite the chaos swirling around him. "What you're about to see isn't just a story, it's a reality that affects millions of lives." As slides appeared on the screen behind them, detailing the extent of the conspiracy, gasps rippled through the audience. Emails, contracts, photos, all laid bare for the world to see. Eleanor added her own testimony, exposing the inner workings of the machine she once served. When the presentation ended, the room erupted in applause, cheers mingling with cries for justice. For the first time in years, the powerful trembled, not because of threats or intimidation, but because the truth had finally found its voice. But the victory was bittersweet. As JD and Eleanor walked away from the podium, they knew the fight was far from over. New challenges awaited, new battles to wage. Yet for the first time, they felt hopeful that change was possible, that courage could triumph over corruption. And so, their journey continued, driven by a shared belief that even in the darkest times, light could still shine through. Thank you for sticking with me through this wild ride. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more content like this.